Hello, my name is Edwin Rutsch, and I'm the director of the Empathy Center located here in beautiful Santa Barbara, California. The center's mission is to build the empathy movement and to raise the level of empathy in society through education and community building initiatives.
And my name is Anita Nowak. I teach at McGill University, and I'm the author of Purposeful Empathy, a book that invites readers to turn up the volume of empathy in their lives.
And at the beginning of 2024, Anita and I co-hosted the Empathy Summit, brought to you by the Empathy Center, and more than 40 authors of books about empathy participated.
They shared what their book was about, why they were motivated to write it, and what they hope readers will take away. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope you'll buy their book. My pleasure to welcome Dr. Terri Givens to the summit. She is a professor of political science at McGill University and has held a variety of senior positions in higher education across her career. She's a sought-after speaker and consultant, especially on leadership, diversity, and inclusion. And she is the author of Radical Empathy, Finding a Path to Bridging Racial Divides. Welcome to the summit, Terri, and over to you.
Thank you so much. And let me know if you can see my screen okay. Let's see, I have to hit share. Okay. So thanks so much for having me. And, it is such a thrill for me to come right after Helen Reese, whose work was so influential to mine. So thank you, Helen, for all that you do. But my work really focuses on my personal story, initially at least. And then I as a researcher, I branch out into looking at various aspects of how empathy can help us bridge not only racial divides, but many different kinds of divides. So I want to start off with my story because that's what really motivated me to write this book. And as you can see, on the left, we have my family. And the baby is me. This was 1964 when I was a newborn, and the youngest of 7 children. My father was in the military. And, this was an interesting time to be born and to grow up because, of course, in 1964, you had the passage of Civil Rights Acts, Immigration Acts that really changed the nature of the country. And I really wanted to try to understand my own family history in the context of that broader history, but also understand how I was raised with bias. It was interesting to hear others talk about, focusing on yourself and vulnerability. And, I model vulnerability all throughout my book, and it feeds into my classroom teaching and so on. And I think as I will say, vulnerability is one of the most important things that we can do to not only understand our own biases, but also to help develop empathy for ourselves. And so my parents, they were part of the Great Migration, leaving the South, going to the North and the West. My mom, they both ended up in Los Angeles and when they met. And, for me, that was a very interesting thing to think about in the context of books like Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns, and to understand that, my parents had made these choices about where to live. I grew up in Spokane, Washington, which is a place that is, at the time especially, was less than 1% Black, but they made those choices to raise us in that place because they knew we would have better opportunities. For many, many years after I left home, I was angry about, why did we grow up in such a place that was so lacking in diversity, and why did my parents make those choices? And unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to talk to them much about that. My father passed, and actually the book opens with Radical Empathy with the passing of my father from a heart attack in 2001. And my mother passed away, she had a stroke 5 years later. So, healthcare became a huge component of how I tried to understand how racism and these different aspects of structural discrimination work in the U.S. especially. And so even though I wasn't able to talk to my parents about it, but I really wanted to understand. So a lot of reading about the Great Migration and how people were making choices during those times, and really trying to understand how, in many ways, my parents had bias against other Black people, and how that had developed in me, and how I had to overcome that bias. And then I also have a picture here of my father. This picture I only discovered a few years ago. And actually, it really impacted me because here he is in 1962 in his NCO class. And, he's the only Black person in his class. And, I've been in that situation so many times, especially in academia, where I'm the only Black person in the room. And he always taught us, you have to work twice as hard to get half the credit. And unfortunately, this theme is playing out in academia right now as we see what's happening to Claudine Gay and others. And actually, I just wrote a piece or did an interview about that, and I'll put that in the chat after I'm done. But and I have to say the shot of me at Stanford is a little gratuitous, but I like to emphasize the fact that both of my grandfathers were sharecroppers, and I made it all the way to Stanford. I have a PhD. I'm a professor, and this is this is what our ancestors wanted when they made that migration from the South to the North and the West. For us to have access to education and so on. But that has to go beyond, people having to move. We want people to be able to have that access wherever they are in this country. And so we have to work. I think empathy is so critical to bridging those divides. And that's what I was in the process of developing as I tried to understand my family history, is empathy for myself initially, vulnerability, and then practicing empathy. So, the process of writing the book was very much a deep dive into my family story, but also into the literature. I've read many of the people's books who are here, and trying to understand the concept of empathy and how it can help us to bridge racial divides in particular, because of course, I was writing this in the era. I had just finished my draft when George Floyd happened, and I had an amazing opportunity to practice empathy when I went to McGill, because they were just starting their strategy to address anti-Black racism. When I was recruited at McGill, they only had 12 Black faculty out of 1,700. And they asked me not only to come as a professor of political science, that was the first part, but then I did work for 2 years with the provost office to help with recruitment and so on. And so this is how we can, for me, taking action is just a normal part of what I do and have always done. But, I developed these 6 steps towards radical empathy because I think that 6th step is actually the last 2 steps are so important. So willingness to be vulnerable, becoming grounded in who you are. And that was so important for me. I talk about my 20s as my years of cognitive dissonance, opening yourself to the experiences of others, practicing empathy, which is something I do every day. And I love that Helen talked about parenting, because that is an ongoing struggle, not just raising your children to have empathy, but as they get older, having empathy for their struggles and making sure that you're being open to their experiences. So I'm still practicing empathy every day, but also taking action. And actually my next book, which the main title is called Reckoning, is taking action, creating change, and building trust. And that part of it is where I want to tell more stories about people who are actually taking action. Where are we seeing change happen? And so, this is really a central component to how we can actually start to bridge racial divides, to understand our own biases. I loved Arthur's story. That was just so touching to me. And, in many ways to this, to answer that same question about, my father passing was really a catalyst for getting down this path, right? It took a long time, but that was in 2001 that he passed. But those kinds of things, I think, do trigger certain emotions in us, and wanting to, for me, it was that huge desire to want to understand why this happened. And I think that's true for so many of us, and that we have to develop empathy in order to to cope with so many of the conflicts and issues that arise in our society. So I just want to note that you can download a reading guide to the book on my website. I'm on social media. I write a blog where I talk about kind of, working on myself and radical empathy. And as I said, I'll post the link to the article that I just posted about the whole Claudine Gay situation. But this has been an amazing opportunity, and I'm going to stop the share here and come back to the screen. And I hope that that people understand that we have to start. I guess others have already said we have to start working on ourselves first, because it's hard to understand others and have empathy for others if you don't have empathy for yourself. So I think I'm getting close to time, Anita, and you're about to say the 1 minute.
Thank you so much, Terri. I certainly can speak on behalf of McGill as an alum and as somebody who teaches that we're grateful to have you, in our community. Thank you so much for your presentation.